So once again, friends, what we're going to do today is respond to a question I received on YouTube several months ago now. Animals don't have souls? Really? I think this teaching is just so cruel. I've known a few animals more intelligent than some people. And I want to preface today with a couple of things. First of all, to say this is not a make or break issue for me, although it is one that I certainly struggled with as a child. Secondly, I want to say that one of the great values of Swedenborg's work and the new church that takes its lead from him is the idea of freedom according to reason. In other words, you don't need to agree with anything that I have to say. Having said that, I think there are also some useful reflections that we can gain from considering this question. First of all, what do we mean by the word soul? And I'll offer just a couple of passages from Swedenborg. A soul symbolizes what is alive in us, and so our life itself. The soul is nothing else than the actual person living in the body. That is, the soul is the person's inner self, acting in the world by means of the body and imparting life to the body. Now, Swedenborg does say that animals do have a soul, however, it's of a different kind to the human soul. The souls of human beings exist on a higher level and in a more perfect state, and are such that they are able to look upwards, and so to heaven and the Lord. Consequently, the Lord is able to join them to himself and grant them eternal life. But the souls of animals are such that they cannot do other than look downwards, thus merely to earthly things, and so can be joined only to these. This is also why they perish together with the body. And this is really the crux of the matter, isn't it? Now, another way to express this issue is that people also have a spiritual mind. He writes, "We have an earthly mind and a spiritual mind, the earthly mind below and the spiritual mind above. The earthly mind is our mind for this world, and the spiritual mind is our mind for heaven. The earthly mind can be called the animal mind, while the spiritual mind can be called the human mind. We are differentiated from animals by our having a spiritual mind that makes it possible for us to be in heaven while we are in this world. It is also what makes it possible for us to live after death." Now, as I've gone about my work in the last few weeks, I've happened to stumble across a biblical support for this idea. As you know, I've been doing a series on the creation story, Genesis chapter 1, and I was looking for a Jewish perspective on these words, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." One of the articles that I came across pointed to statements earlier in Genesis chapter 1, where it says, "Let the earth bring forth grass," and "Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind." So God, in his creative work, is speaking to the earth and commanding the earth to bring forth these things. And then when we reach this point with the creation of humankind, it says, "Let us make man in our image." And the way this Jewish article writer understood that is that this is the Lord speaking to the earth. Let you and I, God and the earth, bring forth humankind. What they then went on to suggest is that at death and the separation then of the earthly body and the spirit, that the body descends to the earth and returns to the earth, and the spirit rises and returns to God. This perhaps lends support to this idea that whilst animals partake of earthly things, humanity partakes of both earthly and spiritual. Friends, I'd like to offer 3 reflections on this issue based on what I've read. First of all, I want to ask, who is Swedenborg's audience? Well, it's quite obvious. He's talking to us. He's talking to humanity, and he's doing so for our sake. I very firmly believe in a loving God. And so in a sense, I put aside what I believe in all other regards and know that the Lord has care for all of his creation. And so in a sense, I don't need to worry about the animals of creation. The Lord will look after them in a way which is loving and kind. What I have to worry about is myself. Because one of the things that Swedenborg also says is that whilst animals live according to the order in which they were created, mankind, humanity, does not. Because we humans, regarded in ourselves, are much lower than animals, we have no chance of survival unless we are intimately connected with the Lord through heaven and the world of spirits. Left on our own, we would plunge headlong into destroying ourselves and everyone else, because the ruination of ourselves and everyone else is all we long for. Our proper code of life is to love one another as we love ourselves. But what we actually do these days is to love ourselves more than others, and thus hate everyone else. Now, with unreasoning animals, the case is totally different. Their proper code is the one they live by, and so they live in thorough harmony with their destiny. We humans, though, live exactly opposite to the pattern ordained for us. So if the Lord did not take pity on us, if he did not bind us to him through angels, we could not possibly survive a single moment. Of this fact, humanity is unaware. So when we say all of this, we mean that when an animal is hungry, it goes seeking food. When it is not, it does not seek the destruction of another just for the sake of it. Whereas we, humans, can tend to be very destructive with no cause, no reason outside of our own selfish desires. So when the author of this question says that they know a few animals more intelligent than some people, that is absolutely true. The second thing I want to think about is our relationship to animals and our tendency to view them as though they are images of ourself. Swedenborg writes this: "The reason why most people do not know how to distinguish their own life from that of beasts is that the two are externally alike. When we relate to animals, we relate to them in the same way that we relate to each other. When I meet you, my first attempts to understand you are based upon my own experience of life. I imagine that you are going to act and react to circumstances in the same way I find myself acting and reacting. Where we run into trouble or where we have great difficulty is where you surprise me, where you act in a way that I do not see myself doing so. Our tendency even then is to look at that reaction and attribute a motive to you to explain it to myself, which may, or often may not, be true. It takes a great deal of maturity to step back from that perception of the world and to realize that not everybody views the world in the same way that I do. To realize, in fact, that I am not you, and we may indeed have very different perceptions of the world from one another. And the same is true of our approach to animals. We attribute human emotions and thought processes to animals, and in doing so, we get it very wrong. Now we see it especially In the case of those people who have studied animals and come to know them and understand their thinking processes and the physical signs they give off that are a result of those thoughts. Let me offer you the example of a shark. If I put myself in the water with the shark, I can think of only one outcome, and that outcome is that I get eaten. And yet those who study sharks, observe them and understand them, will tell me that under certain circumstances it's quite safe actually to be in the water with a shark. They can look at the behaviour of the shark and understand the thinking processes and the emotional processes behind the signs they are displaying. If you have a look at this picture, it looks to me as though this shark is smiling, but in actual fact, this shark is distressed. And the sign the experts point to suggest that is the position of the pectoral fins pressed downwards. They call this a depressed fin display. This suggests that this shark is very unhappy and may indeed be about to attack. But not because it is evil or wants to eat me, but because it is distressed. We cannot attribute human motivations and characteristics and thought processes to animals. In just the same way that I cannot attribute my thought processes and my emotional responses to you, even though you are human. My third and last reflection is that animals represent something within us. They represent an aspect of our character. And I wonder sometimes whether we confuse the two natures that we have, the earthly nature and the heavenly nature. Do we attribute more to the earthly nature than is wise or necessary? We listen to Jesus' statement in Matthew chapter 7, where he says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves." We understand the emotional state, the spiritual state that is being referred to in that picture. And when we look at the Isaiah 11 passage, it's very easy for us to look at that as a prediction of some distant future when predatory animals will no longer fulfill the nature in which they have been created. But in reality, if you think about it, these things described here in Isaiah chapter 11 actually already do happen. We know that a lion does not kill unless it needs to eat. There are times when it is quite happy to lie down and allow prey animals to be around it with no disturbance. But what is really being spoken of here is a change of our nature. And the whole of that passage, Isaiah chapter 11, is talking about the way the Lord, as the Word, comes into our life and sets in place a new order, such that our heavenly nature and our lower earthly nature is set in order, in proper balance, and the earthly nature no longer responds in that aggressive, predatory way. Friends, I can only suggest you spend your time this week contemplating your relationship with animals, your perception of them, your relationship with other people, your perception of them, and your relationship with your own inner nature, your own higher and lower nature. What can you learn from acting out of a higher nature, a nature that seeks to observe and learn from the circumstances and the people around it, rather than reacting emotionally from a gut or an instinct level?